Then, out of the blue in 2010, I get a phone call, and I knew that there was a job breaking in Rochdale. I knew that what had happened, there'd been a routine property review of the exhibit system, and the officer doing that had found this exhibit, which turned out to be a fetus. So it was, you know, we were all talking about it at work because that fetus had been seized in a termination. The family didn't know. No consent had been gained. The child had been only 13 years old, just 13, when she'd had the termination. So it was the talk of GMP. Alongside that, her sister, we knew that this little girl had been groomed and sexually abused by gangs of Pakistani men in Rochdale. Alongside that, we had another child who had already spoken to the police 2 years previously, but Rochdale CID had lost evidence, had been overwhelmed though with the volume of the work, and that investigation had been shelved because she'd been written off as not a credible witness, making a lifestyle choice. She was choosing to be abused. And the child whose fetus we had, her sister at that same time, who had also been 14 and 15, had been abused by dozens of men, but had been arrested on suspicion of being a madam. And so the family were traumatised and weren't prepared to speak to the police, but GMP had reopened this investigation. My belief is because they couldn't ignore a fetus. It was something physical. And I got a phone call out of the blue saying, can you come and speak to us? So I went up to Nexus House, which is the headquarters of serious crime, and they asked me to join this job. And as I sort of just spoke about it, it was very clear it was identical to Operation Augusta. Identical. Offender profile was mainly Pakistani men, much older Pakistani men. Victim profile was vulnerable white children between the ages of 11 and 16.
But these Pakistani men, are they just like to look at? Would they just like be working in like a corner shop or a chippy or wherever?
Yeah, I mean, often the way it begins is that a younger lad, maybe 20, will approach one of the kids and will flatter them. And if you bear in mind, these kids, a lot of them have got very little in their life. You know, they're often they're living with just a mum, very often.
Buy them a phone and tell them how pretty they are. And
well, these kids are often starved of attention. You know, they don't have a lot of money. So somebody turning up and buying them a necklace and saying, you're beautiful, and here's a mobile phone, and come on, you know, come, let's go up the moors in my flashy car, and let's go and visit my uncle who's in Rotherham, or let's, you know, come and have a pizza in the come and have a kebab in the shop, or let's get a bottle of vodka. That's how it begins. And then the kids think that these men are the friends, and then before you know it, you know, within a couple of weeks, they're then taking one of their friends along as well. So there's two of them. They think it's a giggle. In the Operation Span, they were actually taking them into two kebab houses mainly, where there was like a bit of a dive of a room upstairs, and there'd be a TV, and they'd watch a bit of telly, then it'd become porn, and then they'd get them absolutely pissed out the tree. And, you know, and then they'll rape them. And then they'll pass them on to other men who will rape them as well. Or they'll take one kid. We had one house, which was used as pretty much a sex den, where they would take one child often to rape, and they'd have maybe 10 men in a room. And this is, I'm saying in the words of one of the girls that I interviewed, you know, that her words were that the men would pass you around like a ball. Now, that had been going, Rochdale knew that was going on in 2008. They did, it was allowed to die a death and disappear. I'm approached to go and speak to these kids, to one family in particular, who actually didn't even want the police through the door. Understandably, they didn't even know about the fetus in our property system. And if you think of the Older Hay children's organ scandal, really, that is a replica of what was done there. They'd seized, the police had turned up at a termination and seized that without even speaking to the mum, to the child, to the family, put it in a freezer. So I'm being asked to go and tell them that we've got this, to gain consent to use it to find DNA, and also to bring on board a child that at the age of 15, who had been groomed and abused by dozens of men, had been locked up in a cell.
They don't want you going in the house.
No, would you? I wouldn't. You know, somebody turned up at my door and they'd done that to my daughter, I'd say, fuck off.
Yeah.
You know, get away.
I'm going to sort it myself.
Now, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they're damaged, but they're damaged far more by what the police did to them than, in many respects, by what the grooming. They don't expect paedophiles to be good people.
And the lack of what the police actually did.
Well, they virtually destroyed the life.
Yeah.
And throughout all that, bear in mind, when I am going to approach them, they're not being abused anymore. They are trying to pick up the pieces of a broken life and move on. But to their everlasting credit, they allowed me in the house, and I made an ally of the mum, who is actually, I'm still, you know, very close to them. In fact, I'm going to see them today and tomorrow.
Your relationship with the mum was very moving when I watched, is it Three Girls?
Yeah.
So if people out there are watching this video and they want to watch Three Girls, is that on BBC?
It's on BBC iPlayer, it's on Netflix.
And it's on Netflix as well.
If you go on my own web page, if you go on Maggie Oliver,
Maggie's webpage is the links below this video.
it will tell you where to go. You could watch The Betrayed Girls, which is a documentary that I was part of. There's a File on 4 called Whistleblower, because obviously everyone says that was the first public conversation I had about the failures of the police and the CPS. But if you go on my website, it will tell you where to go if you wanted to follow I'm jumping ahead.
Let's actually go back to your first meeting with the mum. Can you describe what happened?
It was pretty. Well, there was actually one initial meeting where I went with an ex-colleague where she basically slammed the door in our face, understandably. The guy that I was with was not the most sensitive of...
Didn't he say something that was
Yeah, he basically said, when she said fuck off, he said, look, you know, I know you're not going to speak to us, basically, but we've got to ask you. And so she said, yeah, we've been here before, you know, you locked my girls up and da-da-da-da-da. You know, slammed the door in our face. And I thought, so I went back to the Nick and I said to my big boss, look, you know, we're pretty much on a hide into nothing here. Understandably, they don't want to let you know, they don't want to speak to us. We've destroyed the lives. And this was 2 years after. But I said, you know, I'd like to try and build bridges on my own as a mum to mum, you know, and see whether, you know, whether I can actually. And it was in the December, so over the next couple of weeks and over Christmas and New Year, I remember the first conversation ringing her and saying, she's called Lorna in the drama. Hi Lorna, it's Maggie here.
Did you go down with your uniform on, would you?
I didn't. After 2 years in the cops, I never wore a uniform.
Oh, right.
I was just dressed in my normal
I
gear.
think it's more approachable anyway without a uniform.
Yeah, because you know I'm not an official kind of person. I didn't want people to see me. I think the uniform puts a barrier up.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
And you know, the only time a uniform was good was when you used to do VLPs to pubs and you used to get mistaken for a stripper. You'd walk in, you know, and you'd go in and they'd think you're a stripper.
No, I'm the real police.
And the other time when it came in handy was when you'd go into a pub where there was a big bust up, you know, with like pints flying and, you know, a proper old like set to everybody punching the lights out. And I'd be the first one who'd go in very often because, you know, and I'd go in and say, just like being a mum really, listen you, what is your mother going to say? If I have to go and knock on the door and say you're locked up, I said, so zip it. I said, all my mates are outside. So button it, sit down and get on and, oh, sorry miss, really sorry miss. Yeah, you're right.
So in the documentary then, I was really rooting for you to make progress with Lorna. So you've gone in, you got rid of your partner, and how does she start responding to you then?
I think, you know what I think the real key was? I think it was my Macy, my little granddaughter, because Macy was very poorly. And actually she died about 6 weeks after I'd met Lorna. And I talked about Macy, and I talked about my own kids. And I said to her, look, you know, I've got kids, and I understand why you don't trust the police. I understand why you don't want to speak to me. But can you just give me a chance? And she allowed me in the door. And then I took her for a brew. And she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. She'd had 8 kids. One of her sons had actually been sexually abused in Knoll View, where Cyril Smith was one of the predators.
So you spoke mother on mother.
Yeah, we just were people.
Yeah.
I'm just a person.
Just having a brew.
The police was my job.
Yeah.
But I'm a person first. And how can you not empathise with somebody like that? You know, she's done nothing wrong. Yes, she'd had problems in her life. You know, she'd lost her son. She had a nervous breakdown. In the past, she'd had a very violent ex-partner. You know, but that is normal for many of these families. We should be focusing our attention on the paedophiles. We should be nailing their hats on, and we can't do that without the victims telling us what's happened. And most of those victims come from a very difficult start. Doesn't mean that they're not telling us the truth. In fact, often they've got nothing to gain. The only reason they talk to us is to help other kids and prevent them going through it. So with Lorna, I keep nearly trying to use a real name. With Lorna, it was just a very slow process. We'd go for a brew. I'd talk about Macy. But at that point, I wasn't allowed to talk about the evidence anyway.
So you're thinking in the back of your mind, you know, I'm going to build this relationship with her, but at some point, I've got to tell her about the fetus.
Yes. But trust is the key. And without trust, you're not going to get anywhere.
If you'd have just blurted it out on the first day, you wouldn't have even got to see her again, would you?
No. But rolling back, when I agreed to go on that job, I was shown policy documents because I told them I wasn't interested. In fact, I told them to stick it because I'd been there and I'd had years of sleepless nights thinking what's happened to these kids on Operation Augusta. And do you know, and what's it when you give somebody the first public, I'm telling you something for the first time. Exclusive. This is an exclusive.
We have exclusives on the True Crime Podcast.
And I wouldn't be saying this except for the fact that GMP have not even had the courtesy of coming to me and telling me. But Operation Augusta, that I have written about in my book, has now been reopened by GMP as a result of Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Manchester, reacting to what I've said in the documentary and on the drama. Now, that is proof to me that what I've said all the way through this journey is right.
Well, something's hit them, hasn't it?
Well, but they haven't even had the courtesy to ring me. In fact, they went to Victoria's grandma when she's nearly 80 years old. She's blind. I've kind of supported her through this process and told her that it had been reopened. They've never come to me.
They probably feel you've strong-armed them with the truth, and some of them resent that.
Oh, of course they do, yeah, of course they do. But I don't really trust them anymore either, which is the big bosses, not my ex-colleagues. I forgot why I said that, but I've lost my thread.
It's all right. We were talking about how in the back of your mind you've got to tell Lorna at some point about the fetus. You had your first brew with her, and now you're establishing this relationship with her, and she's revealing more things to you. And where are you planning to take it from there?
I think the reason I mentioned the police was because I was shown policy documents to say that if these kids and families told us what was happening, we would support them right through the process. There would not be a repeat of Operation Augusta. That's why I said that. Okay. So I'm giving Lorna assurances that if she trusts me, that I will hold her hand right through this process, you know. But she saw very clearly that the only way to stop the abusers from raping many more kids, which was still going on and still is, was to take them to court, to put them away. And a way of doing that was to support her girls in telling me what had happened to them. So little by little, as her trust in me grew, she had no doubts that these men needed to be put away. She had been trying by going to, she was in case conferences which are attended by police, social services, crisis intervention, all the agencies. She was going to those meetings because her kids had been on the child protection register. She was telling them what was going on, and nobody had done anything. One man even threatened to shoot the girls, pulled up in a car with a gun and pointed a gun at them and said, you know, basically, button it.
What else did she tell you when she started to open up?
She just knew what had been going on, you know, that the men were picking up her kids in cars. They were going to school to pick them up.
How had her kids fallen in with these men in the first place?
What happened was she'd lost her son, and then she had a terminally ill relative who lived in another part of the country. They'd had to move to that part of the country to nurse the relative. When the relative died, they moved back to Rochdale, but were unable to be rehoused in the area where the kids had grown up. So they were put the back of beyond somewhere, and at weekends, the girls would go and stay nearby where they'd originally lived, so they could mix with the friends.
Yeah.
And from that, actually, it was the younger girl, had a friend who was already going to the kebab houses. So the younger girl went along, and then she took her older sister, and then the girl who is before that, the girl who is Holly in the drama, she went before. It was actually Ruby who went first, then it was Holly, then it was Amber, and it just becomes a regular occurrence, and it becomes normalised.
But didn't one of the girls get paid for taking the girls there?
That's what was said, and that is where it was actually that. I think it was that thing that ultimately made me resign from GMP, because it's really difficult to cover all this because there's so much.
This is one of the parts I'm most fascinated in, because I've been doing a lot on the Epstein case on my YouTube channel, and the prosecutors are saying one of the complexities of the Epstein case is that, you know, Madam Maxwell went out and got these girls, teenagers, underage girls, went to schools and colleges and got these girls, and some of the girls, after they were groomed into doing these, it was massages, but then they turned into sex acts with Epstein, they then went and recruited their classmates. So the complexity for the prosecutors was, we've got people who are victims and suspects, and they're doing the same thing. So how do you actually classify that?
They're all kids, so they're still victims, aren't they?
They're all kids, exactly. Yeah.
You could have said about all these kids were being paid.
Yeah.
They were getting vodka, they were getting cigarettes, they were being given 20 quid or 30 quid.
Kids.
They were kids. I 100% dispute that Amber was any different from any of the other kids. And actually, she's been acknowledged as a victim by Rochdale Social Services. There was never any evidence that she was any different from the others. What really happened was that as this family came on board, what happened in relation specifically to Amber was she had been arrested 2 years previously by Rochdale CID as a 15-year-old child. She'd been put in a cell. She had been raped by, she told me, of 24 men. There were many, many more than that. And in the course of her interviews, she named them, she described them. She went to Viper ID Parade, which was meant to be the first of many. She picked out, I think it was 8 out of 10 possible rapists. She pointed out all the locations. She produced a document that named all the men, that gave their phone numbers, where they lived, where they worked. That document became known as Document 29, and it was key to the whole of that investigation. What happened, though, she'd been arrested in 2008. So, before I was given permission to speak to Amber, the top lawyer in the CPS, who was head of the complex case unit, scrutinised what had happened in 2008. The abuse was long finished. Nothing new had happened in 2 years. So we were looking at what we already knew. But because she'd been arrested, it meant that we might have to deal with Amber differently. So...
As not a credible witness?
No, not as a... this is very complicated, and I'll try and simplify it. But if the Gooch Gang trial that I've just mentioned before, we had 2 or 3 key witnesses that actually had been participating gang members. So one of whom potentially was even in the car at the time Tyrone Gilbert was shot.
Well, aren't they just snitches? They're old enough to know better, so they're just rats.
But in the law, there are different ways of dealing with them. You can't just say, right, you're a dealer, you're a gunman, you've shot somebody. We couldn't just say that. But forget all that. You're going to be a witness in this trial. You have to deal with them in a way that that all their criminality is addressed first. So they might be charged, they may be prosecuted, and then they can come on board as a witness. But there are different ways of dealing with them, and those decisions have to be made by very senior lawyers. So because Amber had been arrested, the most senior lawyer looked at what had happened, and after 2 months of scrutiny, in which time I wasn't able to start interviewing, at the end of 2 months, the CPS came back and said, this child should never have been arrested. This child is an out-and-out victim. This child should be interviewed on video, in a victim interview suite, exactly the same as all the other victims. And that is critical. That is what my journey since then rests on, actually, because that decision was made at the highest level. And at that point, I was given the green light to start interviewing her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're calling a child a prostitute, you're criminalising that person.
Yeah.
And a child cannot make that decision. So they are a victim of child sex trafficking, paedophilia, abuse,
Absolutely.
all of the above.
And the very fact that she's received compensation is proof that she was a victim. But what happened, and I am simplifying it, what happened, she spent months being interviewed as a victim at the request, at the decision of the CPS and the police. I did those interviews. She went to ID parades. She pointed out all the addresses. She provided as much as she humanly could to assist us. The men that she named also raped other kids. 6 months later, she blew that job apart. Absolutely. My opinion is nobody expected her to open the can of worms in the way she did. And the authorities decided they didn't want this job to explode and go into all these areas. So what they did, they pulled it right back, really, and built the case around just one child, which was Holly. She was absolutely a victim in the same way as all the others. She was treated badly as well. This isn't about a good victim or a bad victim to me. It's about all victims. So at the end of 6 or 7 months, when this family have put their life on hold every day, have assisted the police through me, because I was given cast iron guarantees, the end of 6 months, they changed their mind. In one meeting, which I wasn't even party to, they came out the meeting and I was basically says, sorry, Maggie, we've changed our mind. We're not using Amber anymore. There was a lot more to it. There was a path to that where they were trying to alienate they wanted her to walk away because that would have been the easiest thing. But she never did, because by that time, all these kids trusted me. They'd give their lives up.
By making
for
her
it.
walk away, look at all the crimes those child rapists would have then gone on to commit.
And do you
And
know?
still are.
And still are.
And do you know that every rape that she mentioned or spoke about in evidential videos, every rape she mentioned, every man who raped her, not one of those was recorded. There is no record of that on any of the... I've told the Home Office Select Committee about this. And actually there was an article very recently about, I think it was Nottingham, where they've picked up... I was telling them years ago. So, and the job of any police officer is to record a crime. And if you're not going to prosecute somebody, you explain why not. Well, they buried it. Without me opening my gob and keep going on about it, nobody would know about that. So but listen to this, it gets far worse because they changed the mind. And I was told, in fact, one of the officers said to me, Maggie, calm down, listen. What would these kids ever contribute to society? They should have just been drowned at birth. And that is the truth. I swear to you that every word I say is truthful. It shocks me to this day.
How senior was that person?
Well, I can't identify. I'll go to court once.
Not the name, but can you say this position?
Very senior. Very senior. Very senior. That wasn't a colleague. But when you've got people in positions of authority with those kind of opinions, you're on a hide. And the drama, 3 girls, is in that scene. The drama, in my opinion, doesn't go nearly far enough, but it does a phenomenal job of explaining grooming. And I'm very proud of the 4 years that I worked on that. But it gets worse because I stormed off that job that day because I would have planted him. I was just ashamed, horrified, shocked, I just can't explain. And I still
You're saying
feel
a child sex... A rape victim, a child, is a throwaway person.
Absolutely. And after they've put, 7 months of their lives on hold to help us for no reason other than they want to help other kids. But it got worse because, and I'm skipping through lots of things.
You find it your time.
Yeah.
You don't hear this sort of stuff. You hear,
I just
heard about that girl, and I automatically thought, well, if she's taking kids around there and getting paid for it.
That wasn't how it was.
But
that was not how it was.
It's how they portray it, isn't it?
It's how they portrayed it. Because it's another way of saying she's not a credible witness.
Exactly.
She made a lifestyle choice. She's a bad kid. You know what? And that is in the drama,
But she's still a kid.
She's still a kid. And the damage that they have done to her will never go away. I've done my best to put it right. But it gets worse because what happened was they binned her. I walked off that job. Nobody rang her to say, we're not using you. To this day, nobody has been to her to say, we're really sorry. But what happened 8 months, 9 months later, once the barrister and the legal team got their head around what had happened, read all the evidence, saw what had gone on, they thought, shit, we can't run this trial without her evidence. But, send somebody else to knock on her door now. She's going to say again, quite rightly, do not come near, I think Mum would have murdered him. So what do? The only thing left to do, they needed her evidence in court. The only way that anyone's evidence can be entered into a court of law is either if you're the offender or you are a witness and you're available to go into the witness box. Otherwise, it's inadmissible.
So
they've alienated her as a victim, as a witness. So what they're going to do, they're going to now go right back to square one and make her an offender again. But, listen, I've got to finish this. But any offender, whether it's Jack the Ripper or Yorkshire Ripper or whatever, Fred West, you're entitled to know what you're being locked up for. You're entitled to be cautioned, to have legal advice. You are innocent until you're proven guilty. Everything used against that girl in court was as a result of what she told me on her video interviews. And they never even told her, right? It's not finished yet. They never even told her. So she was portrayed in court as an older madam who had recruited girls for this paedophile ring. That is a complete travesty of the
really?
truth. No, well, I can't to this day. You can see how emotional. I've got to follow it right through to the end.
Please do.
So she was portrayed in court in secret because she didn't even know that she was being named on the indictment as one of the gang in the conspiracy in the conspiracy. But they decided they weren't going to charge it. Well, the reason they didn't fucking charge was because any solicitor worth his salt would have got that thrown out at the very first hurdle. Because the CPS had already decided at the highest level that this kid was a victim.
Yeah.
Yeah? So then I go through all my process and I can go back to
They
that.
get mad at you now, the family. Well, she doesn't know
Oh,
yet.
no. She didn't know. In fact, I was forbidden from going anywhere near the family. I was treated like the enemy. I was threatened. I was told that you hand your phone over and you mustn't speak to them and you mustn't do this. And I'm at home.
Because you're doing your job.
Because I was doing my job. And I was saying, this isn't right. But they didn't want to hear that. So shoot the messenger. So I was going out my tree at home. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. What is going on?
They're thinking you're the whistleblower then, aren't they?
And I spent 18 months trying to be heard as a police officer. But what happened... And I can go back to this, but I want to follow Amber's thread.
Yeah.
So what happened was, I knew what was going on just before the trial, but I'm forbidden from speaking to them. I can't say anything. Probably the trial would have fell apart, because what they've done to her is unlawful on every level. You are entitled to know what's being said against you, whether you're a murderer, but she was a child. 6 months after the trial, when I finally resigned and I made my decision to speak out publicly, even though I thought I'd go to prison, the other part that I decided to do was a priority. The first thing I did, I went back to the family and I knocked on the door, and it was like one of them. Understandably, because where have I been for the past year? I promised to be with them and I was forbidden from doing that. Went into the house, I sat down with the family and I explained what had gone on. To their everlasting credit, they let me in and they listened to me. And I said, I said, amongst all the other things, I said to Amber, are you aware that they put you on the indictment? And she did not have a clue. She burst into tears. And suddenly, the penny dropped, and this is covered in the drama, just slightly. She said, oh my God, it all makes sense. She just had another baby. And because she had been named on an indictment as part of a paedophile ring, as an abuser, social services had decided to cover their own backs, in my opinion, that they were going to take her children away from her.
Oh, no.
She still didn't know, though, that she'd been named on the indictment. She'd just had a baby about a week before I'd gone back to see her, 2 weeks. And what they'd done, they'd turned up at the hospital and they'd tagged the baby unlawfully because they didn't have a court order. 7 days later, they dragged her into court, and to his everlasting credit, the judge was on the ball. And after a year, he threw the whole lot out. And furthermore, he said, if you ever bring this child in front of me again, if you ever bring this child to court again, you bring it in front of me if I'm still sitting, or you make me aware if I'm still alive. Now, that is an indictment of the system. And I know from Amber that the police and the authorities had been going round her mates, trying to get them to say she was a bad mother. This is a bloody big example of back covering. But, we're not letting it go.
That's shocking, that.
Heartbreaking.
It is, everybody in this country should be terrified, because if they can say that about a vulnerable victim of dozens of rapes by dozens of men, what will they say if it suits them? And I am horrified and shocked. And that's why I don't trust the system, because they knew it was wrong. Otherwise, why would they have kept it silent? Why would they have kept it secret? Everybody's entitled to a defence.
No wonder more and more people don't